Hello everyone! This video will hopefully be the first in a series on coding user interface elements. I thought the most appropriate thing to start with would be this, a panel box. It could be used as a backing for other UI elements like menus, dialog boxes, and even buttons. I'll be using Lua and Love2D, but I think the concepts I'll be showing you could easily be used in any language or framework. Just as long as you can draw and scale textures, you should be able to create a panel like this. As you can see, the box can be shrunk or stretched any way, and the edges will not become distorted. The beauty of panels like this is that they are highly reusable, flexible, and can make menus look a lot nicer. They're also not hard to code. What we're creating is specifically what is known as a 9-slice panel. It's called that because it works with a texture that can be split into 9 pieces. If I change the size of the panel, only the middle parts will deform, and the corners and edges will remain exactly the same. This is accomplished by using a tile sheet, where the tiles will line up with their neighbors. If you've used a game engine like Unity before, then you're probably already familiar with this concept, since it's built into its UI system. I know there are libraries out there for this stuff, but because your game will most likely look very different from someone else's game, it's good to know how to do this stuff from scratch. It's also not very hard, and once you've coded a panel box once, you can usually just drop it into any project and reuse it as is. Well, let's get started. Right here in Visual Studio Code, I have some starter code, and I've gone ahead and loaded in this texture for our panel. Let's see what that looks like. Here in Photoshop, this is our texture, and if I turn the grid on, you can see it's a grid of 3 by 3 tiles, hence the name 9-slice. Now how big is each one of these tiles? Let's see. It's 32 by 32 pixels. Well, that's a little big for my liking, but it will do fine for this. Just as long as each one of these sides lines up fine, we're good. And I got it from this free UI asset made by someone named Michelle Bukeli, or however you say it. Basically what I did was I took these right here, copied them, and assembled them into one file. I also went ahead and created my own texture just so we can test it at different sizes. This one is not 32 by 32. If I change my grid size, it's 8 by 8 pixels. So each one of these tiles is 8 by 8 pixels. Because I'll be using pixel art, there's two things I started with. I set the default filter to nearest so we don't get any blurry images. And I'm also using the push library because I want a fixed resolution of 640 by 480. I think that'll be okay for pixel art. You don't need to do this if you want to follow along, but if you don't know how to use push, I made a whole tutorial on it. The link should be in the description. And the other thing I did was I created a file called panel.lua. Let's have a look at that now. So here in panel.lua, I've created a very typical Lua class. So we have this panel object right here, and this is the constructor. And we have a single function right now, render, which is going to draw the thing. So first of all, constructor. Well, we need some properties. Obviously, we need an X, we need a Y, a width, and a height. I could pass them in like this, X, Y, width, height, but we're not sure at this point what we need. So I think the best thing to do is actually just pass in a params table. So now we can get all of our properties from that params table. So we can do X is equal to params.x. And if we don't have an X, we could just say 0. And we'll do the same thing with Y. And the same thing with width and height. And the other thing we're going to need is a tile size, because you have to remember that our texture is going to be split into 3 by 3, and each tile is going to be 32 pixels. So we're going to store that value. But here's the thing, how do we split our image into tiles? Well, I already covered this in my tile maps course, So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste the code that creates the quads from that. So this is basically the same code as that tutorial. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through our image, split things up, and then return a table of quads. So we can actually put that inside of our panel object. But here's the thing, we actually need a texture, so I'm going to pass that in as well. It's going to be params.texture, and then it's going to be params.size, and then params.size again. And that's all we need to create our quads. Now that I have that panel constructor, I'm going to go ahead and create a panel here in main.lua. Now, I could do this the usual way by putting everything in brackets right here and then saying x equals 10 or whatever, but there's actually a bit of a shortcut in Lua, because in this case, you see how I just have a single table being passed in. In cases like this, you can actually create the table directly by doing this, and then you can do x equals 10, etc. And the size is going to be 32. And then the texture I'm going to pass in is going to be the texture we have here, panel texture. There's a little bit of a mistake in the code that you'll see in a moment, but I'm just going to do it like this just so you'll see what the mistake is. Okay, there we have our panel. Next, we need to actually render our panel. I already have the panel render function here. There's two ways we can go about this. We can use the XY width and height that we set here to draw everything, or we could actually pass these things into the render function directly. And I actually like it that way because it's more like Love's built-in rectangle draw function, but instead of drawing a rectangle, we'll be drawing a panel. And there's one other reason why I think that's better that you'll see in a moment. So I'm going to do that for now. And if we don't have these values, we can actually set these ones as the default. So we could do x equals whatever x we passed in, but if we don't have that, we can just say the panel's x. And I can do that for the other values too. Okay. And before we actually start drawing the panel, I want to draw an outline of the whole thing just so we have something to see on screen. So I'm going to use Love's standard rectangle just as a temporary thing. Now, to actually draw the tiles, I'm going to use love.graphics draw. But I'm going to make a little judgment call here because I know I'm going to be calling this function many times. So I want to create a helper function. Okay, this is going to take in the tile number ID, a position, and a scale. And it's just going to call love.graphics.draw. But we have many overrides for this function here. The one we're interested in is this. We're going to draw a texture and a quad. So we have the tile number that's getting the correct tile from that tiles table. And then we're going to do a position. And instead of scale, though, it's going to be rotation next. We don't have rotation, so it's just going to be 0. And then a scale. Okay. And now that we have that, we're going to start drawing some tiles. I'm going to start with the corners because those are the easiest. They don't stretch or shrink, so it's just a matter of drawing them at the correct positions. But before I do that, there's one more variable I'll create. I'm going to store size locally. You'll see why I'm doing this in a moment. And then we need the positions of the tiles. Well, we know we're going to have a top, bottom, left, and right. Now the top left corner is going to be very simple. It's just going to be the X and the Y. So that's going to be simply the Y, and that's going to be X. Now the right and bottom are a little more tricky. You see, what we need to do is offset the tile from the very right of the panel by the size of a tile. So that is going to be X plus the width minus the size. And the same thing with the bottom. Okay, that should be fine. Now let's actually draw them. Okay, so for the top left, it's simply going to be this. It's going to be tile 1 because that's the first tile that's cut. It's the top left. And then we have, of course, the top left position, and then we have a scale of 1. But that could change soon. Let's do the other 3 the same way. Okay. Well, this should be easy to understand if you look at the tile graphic. That obviously these numbers are the order of the corner tiles. So let's save that and actually draw it. In main.lua, I'm just going to draw it right here. It's going to be panel render. And remember, we don't need any values for it right now. But I do want to make it a little taller because right now that's less than 2 tiles. So I'll make that 80 or something. Save that and run it. Yeah, there we go. It's drawing the corners correctly. Now I'm going to resize it to see if it's working correctly. Yeah, as you can see, it's drawing all 4 corner tiles in their respective positions. So now the harder thing, getting all the stuff between that. These are the corners, and now we're going to do the middles. We're going to start with the top middle one, which we know is going to be 2, because the top left is 1. And it's not going to be the left, though. Remember, it has to be the left plus a tile width. So that's going to be left plus size. I'm going to save that and see how that looks. Well, we can see it's the correct tile and it's in the correct place. We got a problem here. It's not filling up this whole area. Well, we know the width of this area, right? That's going to be the width of the hole minus these 2 tiles. But we got a problem because we can't just set the scale to the width size. We need a percentage value to get our scale. So let's try to do that. I'm going to create a new variable called horizontal scale, or hor scale, I guess. And it's going to be the width minus the size times 2. We know that that's going to be the overall width of the thing, but now we need to convert that to something we could actually use. So what I'm going to do is wrap all that up, and then I'm going to divide that by the size. So what does this mean exactly? Well, we know the size is 32 pixels, and we have our width. Let's imagine that this whole thing is 64 pixels. So 64 pixels divided by 32, that's going to be 2. That means that our scale is going to be 2. But on the other hand, if this was half of that, if this whole thing was 16 and this was 32, then the scale is going to be half, or 0.5. So that's really what we're doing here. We can use that here. I'll do horizontal scale. Let's see if that works. Great. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the other ones. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, we got our bottom. Now we just need the left middle and the right middle. It's going to be the same thing, but we're going to use the vertical scale instead. Okay, great. We got all of the middle parts there. Let's change the size to see how it looks. All right, and it's stretching appropriately. We'll also try that with the width. Okay, great. So now the only thing left is that middle portion. It's going to be easy though, because we already have the horizontal and the vertical scale. So instead of just doing one or the other, we're actually going to use both of them. And then it's just going to start right here. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm offsetting it from the left by one tile. I'm offsetting it from the top by one tile. I'm applying the horizontal scale and the vertical scale, and I'm using 5, which I believe is the middle one. Let's save that and look at it. Excellent. Hello again, everyone. I've gone ahead and made a few changes to the code. First, I commented out the outline rectangle because we don't need that anymore. Secondly, I've added these keyboard controls so I can manually change the size and position of the panel. Let's see what that looks like. I can move the panel around with the arrow keys, and I can change the size with W, A, S, and D keys. But you may notice something. You see how when I change the size, it's always coming out from the top left corner? That's the position of the panel. You may not actually want that. Like, let's say you're animating a dialog box and you want to expand from the center. So you want some way to be able to draw from the center. Well, let's do that right now. I'm going to use this draw position function. All that's going to do is just draw a circle at the position. So you can see right now it's the top left. I'm going to go into my panel class, and we have this render function. You remember how we could actually pass in an X, a Y, a width, and a height into render? Well, I'm going to use the X and Y to draw from the center. So I'm just going to do function, panel. I'll make a new function, draw, or render from center. And that's not going to take in anything. And all it's going to do is actually just call this. I can do self render self.x minus self.width, and it'll be half of the width. And the same thing for y. So just with that, we can now draw from the center. I'm going to change this to render from center. Now let's see that. Okay, it's now drawing from the center. And when I change the size, it now expands and shrinks from the center, which is all fine. Of course, this panel box isn't quite perfect. Like, if it gets too close together, the tiles are going to start to overlap, and then they'll go past each other. If you don't want them to overlap too much, there's a couple things you can do. Like, you can make the corners a smaller sprite. That's one thing. It's not always an option, or you could just constrain how small the thing can get. But I think the better thing is to just not draw a panel that small. That's the only advice I could give. Of course, the other thing you could do is create a scale, so you could scale everything by a certain value. I don't really think it's a big deal. Just to make sure this thing is working properly, I'm going to change the texture just to see if this thing will actually work at a different size. So right now we're using the 32 pixel tile texture. You might remember I also have an 8 pixel one, so I'll change that to 8, and this will be 8 as well. Save that. Okay, there we go. It's now functioning quite well. So it can work with a variety of different sizes and textures, which is exactly what we want. The very last thing I'm going to do is lower the resolution. So it'll be 320 by 240 instead. And if your texture is a little blurry, here's the mistake I mentioned earlier. You see how I'm loading that texture before I'm setting the default filter? Well, this does it for all the textures loaded afterwards. So you actually have to load the textures after you set that. I'll just move it there. And the last thing I'm going to do is get rid of the draw position. So let's see how that looks. And there you have it. It looks pretty great at this size. That's my UI panel. Just add a few buttons and a few other bells and whistles and you've got the start of a menu system. And I hope you liked this video. I mean, next time I want to do some of those buttons, maybe do a dialog box. Just do everything UI related. If you found this useful, like and subscribe. See you.